This is Family Electric with Facebook and YouTube channels with Linda Balliro for the first time. How are you tonight?
Hello, Phantom Electric. It's great to see you. Great to be here.
Well, thank you very much for everybody that only hears the audio. We have your website up, which is www.lindaballiro.com. We always like to mention that so people who are on the audio can check that out just off the top. And also want to let people know that we are a featured podcast on the Newsly platform. So you can listen on Newsly, use coupon code GHOST to get 1 month free premium subscription so you can stop scrolling and start listening. We are a featured cat podcast on Newsly. So thank you for being on the program.
It's great to be here and nice to meet you.
Well, it's pretty interesting because we're actually at episode 882. We've been doing these on podcast since 16, so we're almost at 900 episodes. So we're happy to be out here since 2016 doing this. And the focus that we wanted to have on this is like, this is your brain singing. So I have that scrolling below. And being a musician, I started singing back in 2016. I never did. I always was just a keyboardist. And then I realized for my music, I had to step up and actually sing in order to get it further. And so I went through the whole process of trying to figure out what I was going to do. And I came up with my own way of doing it, but by using equipment like this.
Sure.
Yeah, it was a process because I was very shy and I couldn't figure out how to find my voice. And then because I'm a synthesist, I said, oh, electronic vocal transformers. And I'll use preamps and I'll use all these things I learned from being a producer to build up my confidence. So I was like, well, I'll just throw all this tech at my voice to kind of build it up to deal with my insecurities. But so we can get into like, this is your brain saying works.
Okay, yes. And your experience is very common. So today we have this wonderful technology where we can create incredible sounds and effects and moods and stretch our effects, emotional effects, the message that we're sending through music. And that we couldn't do even 20 years ago, but especially like 50, 60 years ago. Or let's say early 20th century is when technology first started, right? But the last 20 years, it's just gone through the roof, of course, and you know that. So we have this advantage of being able to work with technology and not have just what we can do, but we can add to that with our preamps, etc. Many people feel like you do, and they are a little bit shy about their voice, and they don't want to put it all out there, and they'd like to be able to hide behind things or cover it up, make it sound better. But in fact, singing is such a human trait, and it's such a human need. It's something that everybody kind of needs to do at some level. So even people who are not singers benefit from using their voice. If they're not singing exactly, they're vocalizing in some way. They use their voice in some way that makes them feel better. And there are a lot of anthropological reasons, a lot of historical reasons, and a lot of reasons for our body that we use our voice. Oops.
Yeah, it's interesting because I started as a singer songwriter, as a poet, and then I had my poems, and I'm like, well, these poems don't translate the songs exactly, so I had to learn how to change them to fit into song structures. And then initially, I did spoken about my, and then eventually, I found a way to do it in the same way that I write on a piano. I kind of found that it was freeing to be able to take that poetry, turn it into lyrics, and then be able to express myself in the same way I do on a piano or like a rolling. Found that was very freeing. And, as a creative person, because I was already creative, I was already a musician, but voice is an instrument. A lot of people don't realize how much of an instrument the voice is. They like, oh, you're a vocalist. It's like it's a very hard thing to do, and to actually do it is. I have a lot of respect for vocalists, because a lot of people were like, oh, you're a vocalist, and they look at the bass player or the drummer or the keyboard players like they're all musicians, you know.
Yeah, it's right, it's true, and of course, you find that out when you try to do it, right? It's the people who've never tried to do it who think, "Oh, you just sing," you know? But why would we think that about our voice doing music? Because when we do instruments, we train, right? You take a lot of lessons when you're drums or you're working on your keyboard or guitar, you take lessons. Even if you don't, study formally, you learn somehow with some kind of teacher or training program, and you practice and you train your fingers and you train your body and your hearing to make things work. And then you learn about phrasing and how to make things sound good and how to handle a nice phrase musically and how the harmony is affecting the phrasing. And so why wouldn't you do all that with your voice? It's exactly the same as you said. So um, it's interesting because we can all use our voices. It's a human trait, whereas playing a guitar is not necessarily a human trait. So it's not inside our body. It's not something we automatically do. But if we want to use our voice for a professional reason, if we want to sing music that goes outside of our talking range, we want to have more notes to say whatever we want to say in our messages, then you've got to train a little bit. You got to learn how to do it. Singer-songwriters are often afraid to train because they think it's going to change their sound, but it's not about changing anybody's sound. It's about having you be really, really authentic. So be you, and not be somebody else, or not be a manufactured sound. And I don't mean that not in a production sense, because that's manufacturing, but not manufacturing anything here in your body, where you can just be what you are,
Yeah.
and then you can work with it the way you want with all your creativity. I think you're a very creative person, and I love that you go from the poetry, because that's the message, right? And it all comes from lyrics and music. The message comes from both. So, and because you're a musician and a poet, you can put those two together, and that's what we're doing. That's why we're doing it.
Is interesting. I had a vocal monologue, and it was very illuminating, because I'd never taken any formal coaching, and I basically, trial being in bands, and just working on songs for, since I was 17 till I'm 55. And eventually you learn.
Mm.
You watch tutorials, you read books, and I listen to, right, going Cole, listening to Neil Diamond, listening
Mm.
to Bob Dylan, listen to all these people, and then, okay, what are they using? What kind of soundboards are they using? What kind of preamps were they using? What were the producers reading? Watching documentaries with producers, and actually interviewing producers to find out, okay, what are you doing, right? And then I said, oh, then I kind of just learned, because I was so passionate about it, that I just started buying the mixing board, started buying the preamps, started and buying the mics, and figuring out what to do by just doing it, and just saying, well, these are my ideas, and try to translate. I want to do it. Felt like, yeah, I need to have my own voice. I got to find an authentic voice. And I don't want to clone somebody else. Right? I
Yes.
want my voice and make it the best version of me. And when I produce other people, I try to do the same thing. I don't want to turn them into somebody's in the top 10 or top 20. I want to find something in their demo and make them the best version of themselves.
Yeah, that is exactly what it's all about, because people who are really successful in music are not copying a trend or copying somebody else. They're finding their own way. And the ones who do that really can make a living. And also, why would we want to copy anybody? Because when you sing or make music, people are listening to you. They don't want to hear another singer that they've already heard before. They want to hear you, and whoever you are, not just you, Phantom Electric, but they want to see the person who's in front of them, or who's making that music, And that's what draws us in. That's what draws listeners to you, is the authenticity. If you're just making sounds that sound like a current trend, people don't care so much. It's like, oh yeah, that sounds nice. Next, But when they hear something authentic, it's like, oh, wow, what's that? So it's a whole different listener experience, even when they're not musicians or not trained. That's the way we respond.
Hmm.
So authenticity, being you, is what it's all about, and it's hard to do sometimes.
And I've railed against sampling, um, because I'm a kid. I play it right, so I don't like clipping stuff. I don't like clipping somebody else's thing. Even with my drum beats, I build my own drums from
Mhm.
I studied like Dr. Robert Moog's subtractive synthesis concept. So when I go to make a song, I start from waveforms and build through subtractive synthesis through synthesizers original tones. Original
That is
Before I
that
even
is
build
the
my
way to do
songs,
it.
I build the sounds, I build the drums, the kicks, the tone. Yeah, then I feel then I use my original voice and I'm not clipping anything from other people. So I'm not like grabbing a Queen song and then singing different lyrics over it.
Yeah, I mean, it's just some of the things you hear out there are just really shocking, but that's really what it's all about. And if young people, especially
Yeah.
who are starting out, but sometimes even older people are starting new, like sometimes people in like our stage of life have been busy with other things, though they were busy raising children and doing whatever they needed to do in their life. And then when they get to this point, they're like have some extra time and they're like, I want to go back and do that work that I left before when I got so busy. And
Mm,
they're also afraid to be themselves, even though they're older and more experienced in life. So it happens at both ends of the spectrum. And that, again, also has a lot to do with the voice. The voice is something, or the ability to vocalize is something that's really in our DNA. So human beings evolved with voice as one of our survival tools. So when we were evolving from whatever we evolved from back in ancient times or prehistoric times, uh, we were living in an environment, or human beings were living in an environment, or let's say even before human beings, where other animals had much more protective and offensive tools. So they had fur, they had
yeah.
teeth, and they had claws, and they had the a kind of anatomy where they could move very fast and very strongly. And early humans were not like that, and we did have some more things that we don't have now today, but it wasn't enough to match with a saber-toothed tiger. So
Mhm.
the voice became a primary tool for us to survive, and it was used for relationships and tribes and motherhood and raising people and recognizing families and friends. And there's only one other species on the planet right now that we know of that uses the voice in a similar way, and that's birds. It's really interesting. So a lot of the research
Mm.
about how our voice works comes from birds because they do the same kinds of things. They use the voice for the same kinds of reasons that we do. It's really interesting. Well, they don't have careers on the stage, but but they do these other things that we do.
Well, they give their performances though. Yeah, they do have their
Yeah.
performances. I had some parakeets and they would go on and on. But, it was interesting I always singing was good for my mental health, and you had a state like, one of your questions you're ready to answer was, like, how is singing relevant to mental health and as songwriters since
Yes.
2016.
So
I have found a
that that's a
trend with most have said that it's cathartic for them.
absolutely is. As a matter of fact, in my book, Being a Singer, The Art, Craft, and Science, there's a great interview with Mike Gordon. Mike Gordon is a bassist, and he is with the band Fish, and he also has his own band, the Mike Gordon Band.
Mhm.
And he is in here and he has an interview and he talks about this cathartic nature of performance and singing. And it's really a very fascinating interview, especially if you know Mike Gordon's music at all. But there's a couple of reasons why. So
Yeah, I know it.
what happened to me is I had been singing for many, many years in the classical world. And when I got a little bit older, one of my colleagues, who was a pianist that we did concerts together, asked me if I would like to come teach at a conservatory where he was teaching. And this was in Vienna, Austria. And that's where I lived for about 15 years. And I said, well, I don't know anything about teaching. I can't teach. I'm not in a position to be teaching somebody. I don't know how to do that. Oh, you can definitely help these people. Why don't you come? And so I went to a showcase and I saw the performances, and they were really, young beginners. And I thought, okay, I probably can't hurt them. So let me give it a try. And I started teaching, and I realized really quickly that I needed to learn a lot more. So it's very easy to teach somebody what you do if you've been doing it for a while. It's pretty easy to explain and show people what you do. But very few people need to do what you do. Everybody's got their own thing. And just like we were saying about your own voice and your own sound, it's not only that, but it's your own body and your own mind and your own imagination. And everybody's different. So I immediately, within a couple of months, I thought, oh, I got to learn more about this. So I went on a journey of getting some education in how to teach others and how the voice works. And that took me down a very interesting pathway. And I ended up coming back to the United States and studying with a teacher in LA to learn how to teach people and to learn more genres, because I was limited in the genres that I knew well enough to teach. So I studied with him and I learned how to teach R&B and jazz and pop and all these things that I had not learned before, and started teaching. And as time went on, I got more and more fascinated with why was my teacher so effective. So he taught many of the great singers of the 20th century, and all the big name singers of the 20th century were his students, his long-term students. And I became fascinated with why and how does this work. And that's when I began studying neuroscience and learning how do people learn, how do people use their brains and bodies to learn. And that's really, really fascinating. And one of the things I learned is that singing is a motor skill. So it's a movement, right? Just like learning how to ride a bicycle. So riding a bicycle is what scientists call a motor skill, because it's a body movement that you have to learn how to do. And so singing is like that, especially if you're training it to be a musician, like a professional musician. So if you're trying to be a professional singer, or even just a really good recreational singer, just someone who's really good at singing for their family events or whatever, this is a motor skill. So motor skills require a lot of sensory awareness. That's how we learn. So if you think about the bicycle, and you get on the bicycle when you're a kid, and you cannot do it alone. Somebody has got to hold that bicycle for you. I've never seen anybody who could do it, or heard of anybody who could do it without somebody holding it for them, right? And they're holding the bicycle, and they push you along, and you start to pedal. And during that time, your brain is very, very busy picking up the information about the environment around you. So it's the weight of the bicycle, the size and shape and movement of the pedals. The air is coming against your skin, so we don't even conscious of that, but the air and the gravity pull against our bodies, the brain knows about that, even though we don't. And the feeling on the road, all of these things are picked up by our brain from our skin and from our muscle movements. And then when the brain has that sensory information, it calculates something, and does some idea of what you're supposed to be doing in order to not fall, right? Because your brain is all about keeping you alive. And so it sends the messages back to your body.
Yeah.
Yeah. It sends the messages back to your body to tell you what to do, tell your body what to do so you don't die on the bicycle. And this all happening in nanoseconds. and most of it's unconscious. There's some of it is conscious and some of it is
Yeah,
unconscious.
I remember. Yeah, 'cause I'm a big cyclist. Back in the '70s where I learned on a, like, a shooting, uh, what do they call them? Like, I don't know, called Shadow or something, but it was like banana bike, but, now I'm a mountain biker, and I'll go
Mm.
down hills and cross country and go down creek beds and stuff, and it's just, I kinda, like, remember when I first got the balance on the bike, and it felt like kinda like music, like, when I learned piano and you kinda get into jazz and you get with a group of doing, like, fusion, you get in this groove and you just kinda flow. It just becomes like a natural thing, and the bike was like that, and then going from, like, a
Yeah.
street bike to a mountain bike, you had to get a whole different set of capabilities to not be skimming down mountains and coming down creek beds and going through stuff that most people would be scared of, and the mind and the body kind of become one. So the cycling seems like it's a totally different thing, but the music, learning piano, learning synthesizer, learning how to do, write songs and play songs, it, it felt like the same kind of mind soul thing. Like when I'm mountain biking, it's like a total holistic experience. And I would say that my piano playing seems very similar.
Yes, you are so smart because you are actually right on to it. And that is the way things work in us. And to get back to your question, why is this good for mental health? Well, you obviously know why, but to explain it in sort of regular terms is because this sensory awareness, this sensory information, like when you're on that bike in the woods doing all that stuff over jumps and random things in the terrain that are, throwing you would normally throw you off, but you're doing it without a problem. That's sensory awareness. And your brain is totally in the moment of the environment and very busy collecting this data, so to speak, and getting your body to do it. And it is like just like you said, it's just like in the groove, it's in the movement, it's all one unit. And this is often called the flow. You may have heard of that. A psychologist in the, I think, the '70s came up with this idea of the flow and all this criteria for getting into the flow. And many neuroscientists don't really talk about the flow because it's not really something we can point to in the brain. But it is a state when you're in this sensory
Mhm.
awareness and things just move. So in terms of mental health, we can feel how that changes our mental health right away. So if you're someone who's suffering a lot from stress or anxiety, um, that comes from not being in the moment because stress and anxiety is comes from things that have happened in the past or things that we're worrying about in the future. And so that's going. And that
Mm.
sometimes it's not even conscious. So people who have real panic attacks or real anxiety don't even know. Like they're just sitting there. There's nothing happening and there's nothing particularly on their mind, but they're having that panic attack anyways because it's unconscious. And that does happen to people. And that's one of the reasons why it's so difficult to resolve and these some of these mental health issues for people. And doing something like singing, you have a huge impact on your chemistry and your brain chemistry because of this sensory awareness. But there's another side of it that we don't have so much of from instruments. We have a little bit, but more so in singing is the vibration. So inside here, this is the little larynx. You've got a
Mm.
little tube box in there, and that box has the voice inside it. The vocal folds, this tissue made of muscle and ligament and some other fun stuff. And when the air comes up from below, they come together and they vibrate extremely fast, about 6 or 7 times per second, or maybe it's even more than that. But they vibrate very, very quickly. And this vibration has an effect on our body and our mind. And a lot of that is not known yet or just in the process of being discovered. What is the effect? But there are already several studies showing its effect on the thyroid. So it's the vibration in your larynx. Your thyroid is right near there, right in here. So that vibration is impacting your thyroid. So it can help you have the healthier thyroid. And there are lots of
Wow.
other things it does. And that's why we have lullabies. and mothers sing to their babies,
Oh, it makes
and,
sense.
uh yeah, so that's a
Yeah, that
very
makes
human
sense.
thing, yeah, and cultures many, many cultures through the history of the world have, vocalizations for healing, chanting and humming,
Yeah,
all
like
over the
Native
world. It doesn't
American,
matter where you're
indigenous, and
from.
yeah, indigenous people.
Mhm, and that has been used for healing for a
It's
long, long
interesting
time.
because 'cause I'm a Buddhist, a Nam-myoho.
What's that?
Yeah, I do a chant Nam-myoho Renge Kyo. It's like a d um, it's a type of Buddhism, um, that's from Japan, Daishonin Buddhism, which is a Japanese, sect of Buddhism. It was founded back in, like, the late 1600s, but, it's, we chant like a chant typical of most Buddhist chants, and it's kind of a meditation, and it's in Japanese, and it's kind of like, and it's similar to music. What I find when I do music around like 1,000 songs, you start to realize how to use your voice, right? Like because you do it, and you start writing, and you start to realize what you can do, and then what you can do with the mic, and I can feel those vibrations because it's also interesting because I
Yeah,
play too. Like I'll
wonderful.
play my piano, so it's kind of like riding a bike because then you're doing
Mhm,
two different things at once. You're playing an instrument and you're
mhm.
singing, and I find that it makes me feel like really good. Like I spend like half of my time. I'm an analyst. I'm a system analyst, so I have a day
Oh,
job. But
okay,
every
great.
day I have rehearsals for my music, and I do my music because it really feels because, well, that's extra work. I don't think of it as work. It relaxes me to go into like a creative process, and I call it like stream of consciousness writing because I like a lot of jazz and free form music. So I'll just put my recorders on and just do something free flow into my multi tracks and then work on it later. And I just put things down.
I love that.
And then I felt of just doing that, I just find it very, very freeing because I don't like getting stuck on the computer like a lot of modern composers. They go on and they get really, uh, anal about it. They're trying to make something perfect, and I'm kinda like I'm kind of a I'm a
Mhm,
child of the '70s, and
mhm.
I like the idea of like or the band going into like Big Pink and they're just writing the song. And so I like to just
Yes.
multi-track and just have ideas like poems and just work it out and just let your mind trust yourself and just go with it without trying to be so dedicated to the bars and trying to make something perfect. Like you can find a lot in jazz, a lot of people in jazz, you talk to Miles Davis, it's not, it's a feel of the song. You have to feel it. You talk to jazz guys or like guys who are into, the roots rock, they're more into the feel of it than trying to make it perfect. They can feel like you could go with the third take if the feel is better than the 20th take or the 99th. Just felt more close to what the heart was. So that's the way I look at music. I try to get to the heart and soul and feel of it rather than trying to make it perfect.
Yes, you're again, you're just so intelligent and you're so, aware of a lot of things that a lot of people miss, so it's really extraordinary to hear you talk like that because I know some of the science behind it, so I can explain a little bit of what you're talking about in another way, and that is that we have, different parts of our brain where different activities take place. And the science used to be, you and I were taught in school that different parts of our brain each did its own activity, like a part for hearing and a part for seeing and a part for thinking. But today, what they know is that it's actually about the network, not about the actual section. But what you're talking about when we're using technology and the DAW and Pro Tools, which is really hard. I certified in Pro Tools, but I'm not like a pro like you, but I know how to do it. So it helps me work with singers in the studio because I understand what's going on and I can help them better. But at any rate, when we're using that kind of work, we're using a lot of the prefrontal cortex, which is behind our forehead here, and which is our thinking and analytical brain. It's also for planning and organization, So we need some of that just to function and to make anything happen. But that's unconscious. As soon as you're using any sort of conscious thinking, then you're using that analytical part of your brain. And that part of our brain is dominant so that, again, to keep us alive. Everything in our brain and the way it functions is designed to keep us alive. So the analytical brain can become dominant to get us out of dangerous situations or difficult situations. But what happens is when you use too much of the analytical brain, it shuts down the sensory brain. And I think shuts down is probably too strong a word. It's dominant. So any sensory information that's going in, like we were talking about with that leap sensory data, that gets minimized and that gets put in the back burner. And the analytical becomes dominant. And that's what happens to those people who start working on music and are just like, oh, let me fix that note and let me fix that beat and let me get this timing exactly matching. Well, that's not using that sensory awareness, and that's not going to put you in that creative state that you're talking about.
Yeah.
It's going to make this music sound more artificial. So in today's world, unfortunately,
that's my
depending
problem
on
with
who
it.
you are. Yeah, I mean, we could have a whole podcast about that, right? But in today's world, we have, there's some artificial music is helpful for like commercials and technical situations where it has to be exactly so. But if you're talking about art, no matter how much technology or artificial intelligence we get, we're still going to need that human creative influence in order for people to be thriving as humans, in order to feel good.
Yeah.
It's all about that. We're going to thrive and feel good.
Yeah.
I know.
It's true. I mean, I really don't want an AI bandmate in my band. I'm sorry to deal with a human guitar player and a human drummer than any AI. They say, okay, fine, you could pull every drummer in the world and you could reference that. But there's something about a human being that's a drummer. When I've worked with real human drummers, is like they can take something I wrote on a drum machine and do something I would have never done. They just create something that's their as a singer. Like if you take some artificial AI to try to clone somebody's voice, a human being singing in their heart and their soul into the song, and you can feel it. Like I try to tell people, listen to Karen Carpenter, and what does she kind of? It's like, do you feel this melancholy in her voice? And it just is there all the time. And there's this presence and this deepness of her capability. Is just that's our channel. They channel that. There's other artists that are, could be very unique capability, like any unique human. And to me, that's the art of being a vocalist. When you listen to somebody like a Karen Carpenter,
it's absolutely true, because there's no other instrument that shows our emotions or our states more effectively than the voice. So we have it in other instruments, of course, but it comes through our fingers, it comes through everything because of this, the way our brain and body work with that motor information, telling our body how to move. But there's nothing like the voice, because it's just so sensitive. And if you doubt that for 1 second, not you personally, but anybody, think about something like your mother's voice, right? So everybody can remember the sound of their mother's voice, even if she's been gone for a long time from this earth. You can remember that sound forever. And then from the mother's side, just remember times when you're not living with your mother and she calls you or you call her, and you pick up the phone and you say hello, and your mother says, "What's wrong?" Right? So like if something's going on in your life, not if you're happy, but if something's going on in your life and she says, "What's wrong?" and all you said was hello, right? Is because your mother knows by the way you said hello what your state is, and she doesn't have to think about it. It's not conscious, just knows. And that we don't get from the piano, for example, or the guitar. So it's fascinating. It's really fascinating, and it's this sensitive, the voice is this sensitive because it's part of our survival tool. And when you think of it that way, it's the way we evolved with this instrument, and also the ears, the hearing. Hearing is quite extraordinary compared to many other
Hmm.
species, although many like have greater hearing than us. The way that our hearing works with our voice is what's unique. And so these two things together have evolved this way so that we could thrive and not just live, but actually thrive. We could build societies and build communities and have relationships and save our babies so that they would live and not die off. The species wouldn't die off. So this voice is unique because of that. We need it to actually thrive. So if you're not feeling well, if you're having anxiety, if you're not feeling like you can focus, you can't get things done the way you want to do, or you feel, like life is heavy and hard, start using your voice. And it doesn't mean you have to become a singer. Although I think it's great and everybody can sing, so everybody should. But if you don't want to, that's okay. Find something else. So you can chant, you can find other ways of using your voice. You can read out loud, you can talk out loud. You can do
Hmm.
lots of things with your voice that will improve the quality of your life and the state of your body and mind at the time. So sometimes you can just vocalize your way out of a stress situation or a panic attack, or being really down or depressed. You can often just use your voice to get you out of that moment. It's not going to solve your problems forever, of course, but it can pull you out of that state. And then when you
Hmm.
get into the new state, then the solutions appear and the situation gets better, and there's a lot more choices available to you. You don't feel so stuck. And I've used this with many people, and it works very well.
Well, I
Very,
like.
very.
Well, I think things is like as a poet, like you write it down, you put it on the paper, but when you sing or do spoken word, or even like in hip hop, or people rap, the when you bring it from inside to the outside, right? When you actually hear those words or you hear the singing, that it transforms the words into a different. The mother who can hear the voice, right? You can hear emotions in voice. So, like example, like in some of his work, he has a very like a fragility to his voice that is
Mhm,
actually imperfect technically, to some point where it's out of key, it's detuned, it goes off, it crackles, it feels like under strain. Like you listen to Tonight's the Night, that record has a lot of examples of where he did not make it perfect on purpose.
mhm. Yes.
People asked him, and I wanted to go into the ditch to kind of see what would happen if I go and bear it and not be perfect. He purposely
Mhm,
did songs that he did that were more emotional and more fragile and more kind of ramshackle because he wanted to express that with his voice. And I thought that that was super interesting. And a lot of the modern grunge era singers kind of took it from Neil, was like the grandfather of that, because he was able to people that you can use your voice in all kinds of ways in music that necessarily doesn't have to be perfect. It purposely can be emotional.
yes, absolutely, because it's kind of like life, right? The way we use our voice when we talk, and sometimes you're tired, and sometimes you're sad or frustrated, and it comes out in your speaking voice, and we talk that way. That's the way we're designed. So we can do that also when we sing, and we can also create music and art that way. But I want to quote also a famous opera singer. Her name is Renee Fleming. And if you don't know opera, I encourage you to look her up because she's one of the greatest opera singers that we have on the scene in the world today. She's getting older, but there are some people coming up and young who are good too. But she's been a major influence in the operatic world, and she's also created a foundation for singing for health and tremendous research. So I'll just quote her quickly, and she says, anytime that we have some kind of important event, we sing, right? And it's usually, and it's a big important event, it's usually classical and operatic. And so that heightened emotion in music, heightened vocalism that the regular person can't do, is like something that we are drawn to whenever we have
Mhm.
highly charged emotional situations, um, like a national mourning event or a national, the presidential inaugurations are often classical singing, or if they're contemporary singing, they're very high powered contemporary singing, like not what everybody can do. And so this idea of that that's what we do when we have very heightened emotional situations. The vocalism gets heightened. It's like, oh, it's like not like that's a different thing. That's for everyday sort of emotional situations, but the big ones are always with the heightened vocalism.
Oh, I got cut off there a little bit. I
Oh,
want to
okay.
reiterate that point. It cut off a little bit, but it came
Okay.
back.
Yeah, just that whenever we have highly charged emotional situations, the vocalism gets more highly charged and more emotional. And that's, I think, what draws people a lot to some of the
Mm,
heavy metal and these things because they're such highly charged things, but also operatic classical music. The more emotional the situation is, the more we're drawn to
mm.
these heightened vocalisms that are not sort of what the everyday person can do. Did you get that? Did it work?
What do you think about the use of falsetto? Yeah, I heard it. I heard it.
Okay, good.
But I was
Well,
always
falsetto.
very interested in, yeah, in falsetto with like men in like soul music. There's a lot of examples like Smokey Robinson and the
Yeah.
Temptation Top, Delphonics. There's a lot of use of falsetto, and even in heavy metal, you get Axl
Yes.
Rose, you get like have little bands that have even like Led Zeppelin. They tended to have female kind of falsetto voice coming from the mirrors, channeling that. I had some understanding of it, but I wanted to understand your points of view on that.
Yes. So the word falsetto is heavily charged in the voice teaching world because people use the word to mean different things. Male voices have a lower range, a middle area that's really kind of vague and tricky, and an upper range. And the upper range can be called falsetto or head voice, depending upon who you talk to. And it's all just voice teacher language, anyways. What we're trying to say is like, how does the upper part of your voice work and how does it sound? So when you sing like someone like Neil Diamond or Leonard Cohen or Tom Petty, they stay in their lower range. They don't generally go into their upper range. Maybe Neil Diamond does a little bit. He goes into that area that's like a transition. We have the lower voice, then we have a transition area and the upper voice. And there's even if you go higher and higher, there's even more little transitions and more upper. So some of the men you hear in like Motown or soul or Freddie Mercury, Daniel Caesar,
Yeah.
um, these people, they're singing in their not just in their upper voice, but they're singing in the upper voice. And but it's a skill. It's a learned skill. Whether you had voice lessons or a voice teacher or not, doesn't matter. You still have to learn it. So Freddie Mercury kind of sat alone in his room for a long time and many years practicing and trying to get it, and that's how he figured it out. But what it is that ability to access notes that you don't access when you talk. And so we all have more or less the same talking range, and we all have more or less the same ability to sing a wide number of notes. So humans have more or less the same range. There's a small percentage of people who can go way lower, much lower. There's a small percentage of people who can go much, much higher. But that's just like, 5 or 10% on each side. So 90% is the same. But that how to access that is a learned skill. So when you leave your lower voice and you start changing your pitch
Mm.
range, you hit an area of your voice where it feels like really like, what is going on? I can't do it. I can't get those notes. I can't feel it. It feels uncomfortable. Sound like I'm screaming. I can't get the pitches to sound nice. That is the transition between the low and the high. Now, what is that transition? It's actually something anatomically happening here. If you think about a piano or a
Mm,
guitar, they have several strings, and the strings for lower notes and the strings for higher notes are different. So your guitar, your low note strings are very thick. The high notes are thin. Same on the piano, on a real piano, not an electric one, but real piano, the low notes have thick, fat strings and short. They're different length. So we only have one set of strings. We only have one set of vocal folds. What are we going to do? How we get these other pitches?
mm,
Well, nature has done this beautifully, and we can go way up here and we can go way down there, and we have just one set of strings. And the reason we can do it is because the muscles move. And so these are your low notes, if these are vocal folds, and they're kind of coming together like this when they vibrate very fast, very fast. And this is your low notes, your talking voice. But when we need more pitches, it actually changes and it moves and it tilts a little bit and it breaks out part of it, and this part only moves and it actually stretches out, which I can't do with my hands. So it stretches out longer and thinner and gets to be like that thin string,
mm,
like a guitar has. So that period of time when this is doing that, when it's going from this string to that string, is a little tricky to go through for humans. Like, we're not used to it. And so everybody can do it. It's natural, it's nature. But how we react to that sensation is what messes us up. So some people feel that thing happening.
oh,
Nobody, it's unconscious. You don't know, you can't feel it like you feel your hands or your skin, but unconsciously you could sense it happening. And the reaction is usually to do something about it. So you'll end up yelling because you're like, oh no, I can't. You got to fight your way through it. Or you run away and you get this
mm,
kind of voice. And so you can be going, ah, or you can go,
mm,
ah. And those the falsetto-y one, that a second one that I did, can be useful as a kind of
mm.
style. Um, Hopefully you sing it better than I just did, but you get the idea. And it can be useful as a kind of style in kinds of music, but you don't
Yeah,
want to
yeah,
live there because you want to have a variety of expressive sounds
yeah,
in
yeah.
that upper notes, right? You don't just want one sound. It's not useful. So the way to get a
Mm,
different sound is to train it so that you can go through without reaching up and you can go through without letting go. And that's just letting nature do its thing. But you have to stay and you have to kind of train your mental response, your physical response. Your body doesn't add anything, your body doesn't drop anything, your mind stays focused, and then you can just go straight through. And then you sound like all the same. And that's where you get people who can sing through one run range without anything changing. That just sounds, their high notes sound the same as their low notes.
yeah, we get
And
like a Smokey Robinson. Yeah,
mhm,
yeah, yeah,
mhm.
like a Smokey Robin. Some of the guys from the Delphonics, they could stay in that zone really smoothly, and, even like a
Luther
Curtis
Vandross.
Mayfield could we was nuts.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Luther
yeah, there's a
Vandross.
lot of guys like that,
Mhm.
but what I
Prince.
but one
Yeah.
thing yeah, one thing that was interesting though is the room within a recording that I find that within certain rock music and soul music, there was the reason some of the producers type of higher range voice because it cuts through, right? If you've got like the lower range sometimes doesn't cut through with all the instruments, and when you push it to that's why you get like the Axl Roses and a lot of rock bands started to do the same thing that the soul bands were doing was because of the headroom that you can actually cut through the mix and actually have that voice kind of standing out,
In the
which
front,
I think
in the
that's
front.
how I started learning about it from a production standpoint.
Yes, and once again, you're very astute. That's called the singer's formant. And it is the reason we can be louder than other things, even though we're just one thing, right? How is it that you can be heard above a band? How is it that an opera singer, one voice, can be heard above a full orchestra of like 60 instruments playing loud music in an orchestra, and the human voice
Hmm.
can be heard above that? It's crazy, right? Because no instrument could do that. It's the singer's
Yeah.
formant. And it's a special frequency that we have when we hit a certain range in our voice that is a louder frequency than any other instrument. And that's really interesting.
Yeah, and then the
It's
whole
not
headroom
loud
of the
here.
recording, then
Yeah, it's
yeah,
not loud here. It doesn't blend with anything. It's loud out there.
then they could fit.
It goes ping. Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah, it's interesting, like, when you yeah, there's, like, the open air kind of performance aspect of it, and then there's actually, like, the recording aspect when you put it on analog or digital recording, the still is that headroom cut even on the physical medium. It seems to
Yes.
cut through.
Yes, it does. That's really cool. Yeah,
I
you're very, very
interested when I first started singing, I actually used a device called a vocal transformer that actually took my voice and pitched it up, create like a feeling of my voice, and it would do
yes.
it in real time. It was like a rolling piece of equipment that's like a bunch of transformers that do that. I could kind of cut through. Well, I was using my voice, but it was transforming it, and then I learned how to actually use that voice in the range it gave me. I had to learn how to be in that range and how it would work. So there, it kind of artificially created, but I was able to figure out how to use it within the songs that. And then, but it's interesting. I did all kinds of weird, useful tools like preamps and transformers
Yeah.
for my lower tone voice too, because I can even. So I started being able to could normally go, and then I could do lower, like because my low voice is kind of low, and then I could actually make it a little bit lower with this device too, so I could do it. And so I gave myself ranges that I normally wouldn't have had with the use
Yes.
of some tech. And now I'm just kind of
Yes.
living in my normal range with my music. But it was just I'm an experimental musician, so I played with what I could do. But I wasn't trying to make it. I actually use it to kind of characters
Yeah,
in my
that's
music.
fascinating. That's fascinating how you discovered that, and it is true that, you can learn quite a bit by listening back to yourself or hearing what the technology does. So when you heard that technology, transforming your sound, you could then copy that sound, and that's because that's the way our voice works. We learn to talk from our parents, and we copy their voices. We copy everything we hear, and we have that ability. So it is a way to train your voice by using technology to give you that feedback. It's kind of like having that person holding the bicycle when you're on it. The technology is like kind of like showing you how to do it or and
Yeah,
leading your hearing. That's where the hearing is so important because it works. They're connected. But it's also super interesting that you use that and figure that out. And it's the same way with live performance. So live performers, the sound system has that ability as well. So many people that you see singing on stage who are not technically great vocalists, they sound great because the sound system is doing that live. So sometimes even the people you
yeah.
hear on stage, yeah, not the singers
There's a
that you
lot of
know or the singers, but other people.
equipment on them. The transformers, like a lot of those analog transformers from the 70s that people still use them. But they have the ability to just be kind of a radio voice. Because how do you get that radio voice without going through that transformer, that analog transformer on the mic, kind of like this one?
Mhm.
But like the idea, like when your natural voice might not have that. Like so, the radio, board and the soundboards and then all the transformers that these musicians use, they run through racks and racks of these transformers that actually clean the voice up or just project it better than what they could do. Like an
Mm.
opera singer's probably they're doing it for real, but a lot of
Yeah.
people are using a lot of tools to kind of beef it up from Neve and all these other companies that make all this stuff equipment. But it's just once, but you still have to learn how to use it. You still have to learn how to like okay when I go through this, then it projects away, and you kind of live in that zone. Once you learn, like, oh, I can actually get to this zone through, like, kind of live within that environment that I've been given.
Yes, yes, you're right on, and there's a few things that technology cannot do, and that is technology cannot put in the emotion, which we were talking about at the beginning of the hour, and technology can also not do the
Yeah,
phrasing, which is part of the emotion too, but a lot of people today don't
yeah,
learn phrasing because of the technology, because 'cause they're so dependent on technology that they actually never learn how to sing a phrase or play a phrase, and it's so important because technology
mm,
can't make that. So they can do lots of things with your sound, but they can't put you have to bring the stuff to the table. You have to bring the emotion and the phrasing to the table, or
yeah,
else it's
it's
not gonna
phrase.
sound like music. It's not gonna move anybody. It's gonna be, "Oh, that sounds nice," but nobody's gonna really
Just
care.
you might get an auto. You might just get an auto tune type of thing where you're like, okay, well, this sounds kind of robust. I felt it
Mm,
to be, lacking kind of what a Nat King Cole, Frank Sinatra, or like the great female singers of the '70s. Is like, okay, I don't hear that. Like when I hear a lot of modern music, it might sound like digitally perfect, but
mhm,
it's not. I'd rather have the imperfection. I'd rather have
mhm.
the happy accident. I've always kind of pointed out to a lot of people that like they spend all their time trying to get something so clean that like I don't want to hear like the happy accident or the kind of the emotional like maybe you can't predict it because the person is unpredictable, but that's what the benefit of that emotion is like it's a little unpredictable. What's wrong with that? Like if you want to take all the unpredictability, it's kind of not fun because then you go see a performance and it sounds like the master. They go see a band, it sounds exactly like what they put down. I'm like, I don't really want to see a band do note for note what they put on the record. I'd rather hear the singer interpret their song many different ways. I go see Greg Allman's Allman Brothers at Great Woods,
Mm.
and he would interpret all his songs differently every night. I go see him 3 nights in a row, and he did different every night, and that was the
Yeah.
point of going to see it.
Yes, it is, and that's actually how Fish has become such a huge huge, band and has such an enormous following because their audience, their fans know that, and they have to go to every concert because every concert is different, and they can play the same song 100 times, and it's never the same, and that is really exciting to be in the audience for that kind of thing, because that's what singing and music is all about. It's about what you're communicating, what you're sending. It's not about the digital perfection. And and you find when you find the really great singers like Prince or Beyonce, Michael Jackson, um, who do we have today? Some people who are doing things really authentically and really with a high level of skill. They're not doing that digital perfection. So you can hear the recording is digitally perfect, so to speak, but their voice or their message is
Yeah,
always got something natural in it. You can always hear when Beyonce's singing that it's real. It doesn't sound, created from a technology point of view. And the really great singers at the top of the profession, you always find that. You always hear that authenticity, no matter how much the technology advances, because the technology can't make it. So if it's there, it's the person doing it.
yeah. Yeah, I like I listen to Maxwell. I always thought he's one of the like soul guys out there today where he uses like his voice. He actually heard his voice using it, but I think he's out there singing again, but kind of Marvin Gaye and Prince. And he's doing it in that kind of way with not
Yes.
using auto tune and actually using it like and that always is going to appeal to me because I'll go listen to Al Green, Marvin Gaye, and Stevie Wonder, and all the old stuff. Even I go back to Lead Belly, the blues, just the feel of somebody who's authentic. You listen to that like old Delta blues, scratchy,
Yes.
and listening to people like that's a voice. That's a voice that's expressing like listen to Satchmo. It's like the wow. That's it. Like I don't need, I don't need the perfection. I'd rather listen to that. I
Of
try to tell people
course.
like go back and listen to some of this older stuff, and then come back to me.
I do the same thing. All my students at Berkeley, I give them the songs from the 20s and 30s. I give them the recordings from the 20s and 30s, and they're, like, stunned at first, but then when they listen to it, they're like, "Oh, yeah, wow." You know? Because those people were just doing it. They were just that's just the way they sang when they're sitting at the kitchen table, and there's something really, really, inspiring about that and really moving, really moving. That's what makes a connection for us. We live in a world though where we're if you wanna make a lot of money,
Oh,
you have to do it something differently. So it's all about
yeah,
what are you doing? Why are you doing it?
you
Where are
know,
you going?
totally different.
What do you Yes. Yeah, it's
I've
about where
always
you're going.
said like I like independent. I like independent and emerging artists who are willing to try something different. And the show from the beginning has been about talking to people that aren't in the top 100. But that was my point initially, was to draw attention to a lot of creative people who are do have original voices. And I don't think that what I still do. I still have I've transferred to talking to a lot of other people, but my first love was talking to musicians I didn't think got attention because of what's going on with popular music, where it's about more about the money and moving the units than the heart and soul and love of it. And I've always kind of been like, well, I'm so
Yeah, I think there'll always be, a need for entertainment. You know, there's always some of that too, because entertainment has an effect on us as well, even though it's not as moving as something that's really authentic. But entertainment, it's fun. It can get you distracted. It can um, take people away from their daily lives a little bit. So there'll always be a need for entertainment. So I'm not going to be against it, but you just have to recognize it for what it is. And I think a lot of young
yeah,
people
yeah.
today, when they're trying to start to be musicians, they get confused by the music industry and the music business and what they want to do themselves. And
Mhm.
that can be very confusing when you're starting out because of this world we live in that's just overwhelming with the enormous amount of music and culture that we have and not knowing where you fit in it. But when you just do the work, when you focus on what you want to do and you follow your authentic voice, whether it's the voice here or your voice in your instrument, you find your way and you'll figure out which path and what are you going for. And of course, in the music business, you don't always get to choose. The business chooses you. You don't choose the business, but you can always choose your own art.
Yeah, well, I've always been about like I've always pointed, Reed Velvets weren't in their time. Sun Ra wasn't big in its time. There's a lot of music. There's a reason. There's no reason not to be in the top 10 because there's a
Mhm.
lot of acts. You go back to a poet like William Blake. He wasn't known in his time. So just because you're not hitting the chart doesn't mean you shouldn't do the work. You shouldn't. You do it because you love it. Like and what I watch so many outlets that if people will find you if you are confident enough to put it out there. If you take all your work and you're too scared to put it out, then but if you put it out there on the social media, people come to you and you'd be surprised. Maybe people in your neighborhood don't come to you, but somebody around the world might find what you're doing and find it interesting. So that my
Yes,
advice is that don't just be trying to get a trend. Do what you feel in your heart, and then you find your
always.
voice. Like your whole point is like the voice is very important, and you should find it and not clone it from something else. It's
Absolutely,
like find your original
absolutely.
voice.
Yeah, and the only thing that keeps people from
Well,
using their own voice is fear, right? Everybody's scared. Everybody's scared to be compared with other people, or they're scared that they're not gonna be good enough, or that being themselves isn't interesting, which none of that is true. And that fear comes from some of the things I was talking about before, that our voice is a survival tool. And so associated with that is a great deal of fear. So when you are afraid to use your own voice and afraid to put your voice out there and be seen and heard by a large number of people or by strangers or friends or family even, it's because of this DNA that we have, is that it's a survival tool. And if you were, thinking back to tribal situations, if you couldn't use your voice well, you would not succeed in the tribe, if you couldn't build those relationships, if you didn't have the voice, right? And the leader of the tribe is going to always be the one with the greatest voice. And so we're conflicted because we have all the pressure from the world today, the social media and all this comparison culture that we're in, of like, you got to look a certain way, sound a certain way, act a certain way, to be liked, this to have people know and like you kind of thing. We have that. And then we also have the DNA that is knowing if we use our voice, we're making ourselves very vulnerable to failure in our tribal sense, in a very, very survival tool sense that's unconscious. So we have both of those things working at us, and you have to really get your mental game together so that you can focus on your sensory awareness, focus on your how you're feeling something, how you're responding to your environment. And that will make you happy, and that will make you thrive, and that will also make music that people want to hear.
Well, we've gone over where you said you wanted to end, but like it's been such a great conversation. I didn't want to stop,
I
but
know.
let me know. But
I
yeah,
knew
I
it was
think
getting
this
late.
has been a great conversation.
It's really been a lot of fun, and it's
No
so
problem for me. I was just wondering if
pleasure. Yeah, it's such a pleasure to get to know you and to hear about what you do.
want to
It's
let
and
people.
how you do it.
Well, yeah, I just want to remind people that you can check out your website, Balliro, and that will be clickable when we're fully published, so people will be able to click on that and go right to find.
Okay, great. 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 Well, it's been a pleasure.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day.